For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to Strat News Global, and welcome to The Gist, a signature show on foreign affairs and security. Hello and welcome to The Gist, and I'm Surya Gangadharan, and my guest for the evening on The Gist is Dr. Amitabh Matto, a very well-known professor in JNU, teaches and researches on international relations. He's also a very vocal Kashmiri, and for that reason, we've got him here in the hot seat today. Professor Matto, welcome.
Thank you, Surya. It's always a great honor to be on your show.
Clearly, the focus for us this evening is Kashmir, looking at recent developments there, and Professor Mattoo is going to give us a perspective on Kashmir. But before that, a quick look at some of the recent developments over there. I have a small graphic that I like to play here. As you're aware, there was a meeting between the Prime Minister and key Kashmiri leaders. Basically, the takeaways from that meeting, the Prime Minister called for strengthening grassroots democracy, for the delimitation of constituencies that will happen quickly, followed by elections. So clearly, there's a political roadmap up there, and we're going to talk about this and some other issues with Professor Mattoo. Professor Mattoo, a lot of speculation about why this meeting was held and all that. Some of the speculation centered on kind of pressure on India, from the US, which wants its troops out of Afghanistan quickly and therefore wants to keep Pakistan in good humor. Rather convoluted, but do tell us, what is your sense of this?
Surya, as I said, first of all, I want to clarify that you are, for me, one of the iconic television presenters, and that's why I'm here. The first great foreign policy interview that I knew of was Oriana Felici, who interviewed Ayatollah Khomeini. And that's the kind of class of interviewers that I put you in. But in terms of Kashmir, I think similarly, we have to have a sense of history. I was born in 1962 when the China War happened. But when I grew up, in some ways, there were historical markers present all through my life. My rite of passage through my life has been marked by incidents in Kashmir. And then I traced back to history and I looked at the 50s. When I went to Australia, I looked at how Owen Dixon came to Jammu and Kashmir under the auspices of the United Nations to try and settle Jammu and Kashmir even then. And with all the pressure that Dixon had on his command, given that you had the Cold War at its peak, nothing worked in terms of putting pressure on either Nehru or his successors. And it's very unlikely that this would happen in the case of Prime Minister Modi. Clearly, you often make tactical gestures to appear reasonable, to appear forthcoming, to create a certain goodwill. But you know the difference between strategy and tactics. Tactics are intended for short-term, immediate measures, a navigating ploy. Strategy is what you think of in the long term. In terms of strategy, there's no give on Jammu and Kashmir, no give since the 1950s. And certainly, I cannot believe or imagine that anyone in the Foreign Office, within the intelligence services, or indeed within the Prime Minister's office, would concede just because there was pressure on Afghanistan, or that there was the Biden administration and its acting Assistant Secretary for South Asia and Central Asia giving gratuitous advice on the basis of which India conducted this meeting. It was conducted unilaterally by Prime Minister Modi on the terms that he wanted to conduct this meeting.
Then how do you explain the Backchannel talks with Pakistan? Quite out of the blue, isn't it?
Look, let me say that, again, I mean, it's fashionable to be anti-establishment. It's fashionable to reify back-channel talks. I have been involved in track 2 talks for the last 20 years or so, including when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was there. We organized some of the important conversations that we had. In the context that we operate in South Asia today, Backchannel is based on perhaps the National Security Advisor and someone high up in the Pakistani establishment. I think it's the GHQ in Rawalpindi, only agreeing on a ceasefire on Jammu and Kashmir because it's in their mutual interest. I think precisely because Afghanistan is going up potentially into chaos, I think the Pakistanis don't want a second front as far as India goes. And secondly, there are contradictions within the Pakistani establishment itself, which which make it really important for Pakistan and its army to have a certain lowering of temperature, a lowering of the ante on the ceasefire line. Now, whether the conversation that Prime Minister Modi had with these Kashmiri leaders will help Pakistan down the ante, because they had upped the ante unnecessarily in an absolutist sense after the August 2019 events, including the application of Article 370. Now, remember, in any conversation that you have in politics and statecraft and diplomacy, you should always give you a space for some face saver. There is a poet called Bashir Badr who says, दुश्मनी जम के करो मगर ये गुंजाइश रहे कि जब हम दोबारा मिले शर्मिंदा ना हो. So give yourself that amount of space that when you meet each other, you can actually look at each other. So a Pakistani establishment in 2019, because it's a new establishment in terms of Imran Khan being an opposition leader for long, decided to up the ante where there doesn't seem to be a face saver available. However, now Prime Minister Modi, through the ceasefire and through the meeting with these leaders, seem to have at least reached out to a section of the Pakistani establishment and the more pragmatic section within the Pakistani army particularly.
I also want to look at another point. It's after a very long time that Kashmir seems to have come back into the UN, on the UN radar. There's a lot of people who say that, it's a failure on the part of this government. How would you see this?
See, ideally, in a perfect world, you want no one talking about Kashmir. You want to settle everything internally and have peace and calm on Kashmir. Now, if you're wanting and willing and decided to change the status quo dramatically, as happened when in August 2019 by removal of 370 and 35A, then you will face the consequences, the backlash internally and externally. But I must say, as someone who I'm surprised myself that the backlash has been so little within the valley and internationally. Internationally, you're not the kind of soup that people thought you would be. Internally, there is a relative calm. I mean, you might say there is this latent volcano which is going to erupt, but I haven't seen that erupt over the last 2 years. There's some degree of management through various instruments of statecraft, Sam, Dhand, Ved, which has allowed this. The press, you might say, is muzzled, or press has suddenly decided to only articulate good news stories. The mainstream press, in English mainstream press and Urdu mainstream press, was virulently anti-India most of the time. These political parties had taken an absolutist stand. The ones who have attended Prime Minister Modi's meeting, they have come down that anti, no matter what they say outside. The fact that they responded to the invitation, came for the meeting itself, and a majority of them recognize that Article 370 is not going to come back, even though in some ways the Honorable Supreme Court has provided them a convenient judicial cover by admitting the case against the application of 370, but not hearing it or ruling over it. So everyone, including our legal ace Muzaffar Beg, has apparently said, anyone who discusses 370 could be in contempt of the Supreme Court because it's sub judice. Given that cover was provided, so there is a downing of the ante. So I would say that yes, it's true that Kashmir has hit the headlines much more than it had, say, in the last decade or so. There are editorials, there are opinion pages in the New York Times, in the Post, the two most widely read English dailies in the United States. But given the events, Surya, you will agree that we would have expected much more internally or
True. Yeah.
externally. It hasn't happened.
Why is that?
I think internally, as I said, it's because the Modi government has been using all the instruments of statecraft to uh, quell dissent within J&K or persuade, cajole, uh, uh, I mean, all the various ways, Kautilyan ways. So the political parties, they approached in a certain way. The separatists, they have jailed. The mainstream English press and the Urdu press has been, I guess, shown the riot card. Also, the fact that you have these central enforcement agencies working overtime in Kashmir, as has happened elsewhere as well, I think everyone realizes that there are huge personal costs at taking on this government. I mean, most people are petty bourgeois in nature. They're not agitationists, they're not fidayeen, they are not jihadis, they're not suicide bombers. They want to live life normally and comfortably and go on and make. So if you are going to be served a notice by the ED tomorrow, Surya, while you're sitting in Gurgaon or Noida or wherever, ideally you, and if they say, okay, we'll remove that notice as long as you speak sensibly on Strat News, that's a low cost perhaps. There are people who are going to say, no, I'm going to say my mind in Strat News, no matter what happens. But there are others, 90% of the people in some ways want to live a calm life without interference in the world. I mean, I believe in one life. I wish I could believe in reincarnation, in which case I could agitate more this life with the promise of a greater life. But I think most Kashmiris do not believe in that kind of absolutist faith or ideology.
And you don't believe that the ground level, there's a lot of things are simmering, there's radicalization. I mean, you don't believe that. I mean, what's your sense of that?
One, of course, the ceasefire also holding. So the infiltration this summer has been very low, but you could correct me if my figures are wrong. Dekhiye, let me switch to Hindi, even though your channel is completely English. But history में कश्मीर में हमेशा सिमरिंग रही है. There has not been in my 59 years, I celebrated my birthday and I look back into my history and I look back today. There's never been an occasion on which you didn't feel that there was some simmering somewhere. Was it the Hazrat Bal conspiracy? Was it the Al-Qaeda? Was it the hijacking? Was it Sheikh Abdullah's release or arrest? There's always been a simmering. Now, are you going to say that this simmering is going to translate into something which is really big and which will overwhelm us? I don't know. There are no signs that I can see, and as I said, I'm as close an observer of Kashmir as you can, independent observer as you can get. I obviously observe and analyze things and present them as clearly as I can. And whenever I go to Kashmir, whenever I look at things there, I don't see a violent simmering coming in. Maybe there is this simmering which needs to be quelled. And in any case, I think you need to take preemptive measures to reach out. So if it's a question of reaching out through the round table, fair enough. I'm all for it. But to think that this is international pressure working on you at this stage, I think is exaggerated. It's easy to think of Sleepy Joe sitting there, not doing anything, and that's the other image. But at the moment, the concerns of the Biden administration are domestic. He wants to just move out troops out of Afghanistan and focus on America itself, which has been devastated by the Trump years. And he would want a relative calm on in this region, but not at the cost of disturbing the relationship with India, or for India to concede ground on Kashmir. You see, the question of... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, today there is a promise of a return to statehood. Does this suggest that the UT experiment has failed, or what does it tell you about the UT experiment?
I think the fact that made this into UT was as much to do with the fact that you wanted to introduce, enforce certain laws, but also was the carrot that you could give, which was the statehood, return to statehood and elections. After all, Surya, the fact was that they knew that they were going to have to, in some ways, give a carrot to the mainstream, which they could enable them to get the face saver that we talked about, or the kind of incentives to participate again in the democratic process. So, statehood, I think, was always an original promise which Amit Shah, the Home Minister, had made in Parliament. It was a question of timing when they could actually round off enough people, a critical mass of people who could then sell this package as victory. But yes, UT, in the best of circumstances, I do not believe in a bureaucracy-driven government. I left the bureaucracy. I had I had the choice of joining the Indian Police Service. And where are you from? Karnataka, Surya, or where are you?
Tamil Nadu.
Tamil Nadu. Okay, so I would have been additional Director General of Police of Karnataka if I had stayed on. But I found very early on that the bureaucracy is an effective instrument for policy. It can never be, if you have someone in charge of that instrument. It's like a gun. But a gun given in the hands of another bureaucrat becomes a loose cannon. So you need a politically wise leadership, democratically elected, responsible and accountable. One Tamil Nadu officer who's just returned back from Kashmir to Delhi created havoc because he thought he was a kind of dictator sent by Delhi to enforce all sorts of laws. That's not the way democracies work. What you want in Jammu and Kashmir is not to throttle democracy. If you want to mainstream Jammu and Kashmir, you have to give it the richness, robustness of Indian democracy and the civil society that protects that democracy. So I think that Union Territory was perhaps, as I said, necessary at that stage, was also kept in abeyance because that was a carrot going to be offered to the mainstream leaders. But more importantly, bureaucracy, to answer your question straight away, yes, the UT experiment has not worked in terms of delivery of good governance or development. The UT experiment worked in terms of enforcing the writ of the state and in terms of quelling dissent. But in terms of actually making people, officers, more accountable in terms of delivery of public services, water, health, drinking water, no, it hasn't worked. You need a full, robust statehood, especially a state which has demanded accountability from all its MLAs, for instance. You need that safe question. You need someone to go to. Yeah, go ahead.
Last question. I have to mention the airstrike on the Jammu Air Force Station. Does the fact that the drone was used and all that, okay, but it does suggest that there are elements within Kashmir even today who are not content with the way things are, and obviously there is a ground sentiment that you can't ignore there. How strong it is, how widespread it is, I don't know. But any take on this?
Yeah, I agree. When I said that we're not being overwhelmed by a upsurge like the stone pelting after Buranwani or after several incidents in the past, or the Shupian incidents where there was a huge mass agitation on the streets. The fact that didn't happen doesn't suggest that there isn't some degree of discontent, alienation in the valley. So please, I'm just trying to make nuance and argument. And there will be homegrown militancy unless you can reach out to the young people of the state. They're gifted people, they're talented people, but the opportunities that are available today for them to make the best of themselves in this globalized world are limited. We have to tap into the potential, and the best way to do it is for allowing democratically elected leaders to represent those aspirations and to craft policies to ensure that this talent doesn't go waste or that this talent is not misguided into kind of directions that you seem to be suggesting are beginning to emerge even within this calm of a graveyard, as you call it, or a peace of a graveyard, you might call it. But I think it's less peace of a graveyard, but there is certainly less dissent, but growing dissent. So it's important to do whatever has been promised in terms of return of statehood, elections, or even in terms of delimitation. But the process of delimitation must be seen as being fair. No gerrymandering there. And once that happens, I think you should be able to reach out to these alienated young women.
On that hopeful note, Amitabh, Matto, thank you very much for that insight and your perspective. Look forward to more conversations with you on this score, and hopefully Kashmir is on a new path of hope and a lot of potential. Let's look forward to it. Thank you again very much.
Thank you, Surya.
And for all of you out there, please keep coming back to us for comments, observations. Follow us on social media. And I'd also like to tip you off that we are doing a series on the 100th anniversary of China's Communist Party. It airs from July 1st. We have a 3-part series with some experts from around the world. Look forward to joining you there. Thank you very much.
As the Chinese Communist Party marks its 100th anniversary, noted China watchers take a look back at what the world's largest political party has achieved and the challenges it faces going forward.
If you go by population statistics, it is still 1 out of every 14 Chinese men and women who are members of the party.
A party that came from 100 years ago. Machine, you might say, that rules 1/4 of humanity.
Everyday lives of all Chinese citizens.
Only on Strat News Global.